Okay, so let's look at transformations, period, amplitude, phase shift, and midline. So if I look, I'm going to start over here on the left. I always read them left to right. So we have a vertical stretch of 4. This would be lying to us. So I now have a horizontal stretch of 9. We have a phase shift. And we're going to go left 45. And we have a vertical translation down 3. It is the cosine graph. So my period is 360 divided by b. I'm going to do 360 divided by 1 over 9. And that will give me, if I use my calculator, I'm going to do 360 divided by 1 divided by 9. 3,240 degrees to do one cycle. The amplitude is the value in front, so in this case it's 4. It's always the positive value. My phase shift, we're going to say left 45. And my midline, which is my k value, is -3. Okay, if we look at our next function, we can say a horizontal compression of 6. Sorry, that's a vertical compression of 6. We can say a horizontal reflection in the y-axis. We can say there's a horizontal compression of 3, brackets that are lying. We have a phase shift, right 120 degrees. And we have a vertical translation up 7. Again, it's a cosine graph, so it's going to be 360 divided by b. And really, it's the positive value. Technically, it's the absolute value of b. So we're going to do 360 divided by 3. And that gives me 120 degrees. My amplitude will be a 1 over 6, the cosine graph. I'm going to move right 120, and my k value is 7. Okay, so now in this case, they've given us all this information. Now I'm going to come up with the equation. So y is equal to, I have a vertical reflection and a vertical stretch. So I have -12. I'm doing the cosine graph. There's a horizontal compression of 10. I'm just going to write 10. It needs to look like a stretch. We're going to say x minus 360. And then we're going to add 6. My period will be 360 divided by b, or 360 divided by 10, which is 36 degrees. My amplitude is 12, needs to be a positive value. I've moved right 360, and my midline will be k is equal to 6. Okay, in this case, they've done all the work for me. I need to come up with the other stuff. So if I look, my amplitude is there. So it says there is a vertical compression of 3. Now I need to know whether there would be a horizontal stretch or not, or compression. So I need to take my period and figure that out. So far I've got y is equal to 1/3 cos, but I need to know what goes there. So I know that the period is 1,800, and it needs to equal 360 over b. And normally we have b, but in this case we don't. So I'm going to isolate for b. So I'm going to have 360 divided by 1,800. So b in this case will be 1/5. So I'm going to put 1/5 here. It doesn't change. Whatever I find for b is what I put in. Then I have x, says I'm going left 25. So I'm going to add 25. And I'm going to go up 11. So now I can finish what I was working on here. So that says there's a horizontal stretch of 5. We have our phase shift, left 25. And we have our vertical translation, up 11. Okay, let's look at, now that we have a graph, what might be an equation for it. And realistically, we can pick a sine graph, a cosine graph, because it's all sinusoidal. However, we do have to read that this one actually wants a cosine graph. And even still, we can have a variety of answers for this. Certain things are going to stay the same, but the phase shift can change. So the first thing we do when we're trying to find an equation of a graph is we want to know what are the maximum and minimum values. So my maximum value in this case is 6, and my minimum value is -4. From those two, I can figure out the amplitude. The amplitude is the max minus the min divided by 2. The amplitude is 5. That means we're 5 up from the midline and 5 below the midline. So I can also calculate the midline. That's the next step. That's the max plus the min divided by 2. So my midline in this case is 1. It is a very good idea to always draw in your midline once you find it. So I'm going to go in and draw in my midline. So my midline occurs at 1. What it does is it helps you to find the cycles. So I'm going to draw it in. There's my midline. And so now I need to figure out the cycle that I want to do and the period. So what I want to do is I always want to start either at the top or the bottom. That doesn't actually matter because it's a cosine graph that I want. So I'm going to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to start with the shortest phase shift, and I'm going to pick this cycle. I don't have to. I can pick any cycle I want. So in this case, my phase shift is, well, how far off did the y-axis I go? That's how I determine my phase shift. So this is where a cosine graph normally starts. I'm one space off of my y-axis, so I'm 30 degrees off, and I went to the right. So my phase shift is right 30 degrees. Then I want to figure out what my b value would be. So I look and I count between the beginning of the cycle and the end of the cycle, and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. And I know that every space is 30 degrees. So I know that the period is equal to 30 degrees times 6 spaces, or 180 degrees. Now I can find my b value. My period is 180, and I know it has to equal 360 divided by b. So now I can isolate for B, and I can say that my B value would be 2. So now I have everything I need to create the equation. So I can say that y is equal to my amplitude. I've decided to do a cos graph. My B value is 2. We're going to go right, so I'm going to say minus 30 in my equation, and my K value is 1. That would be if I did that cycle. But what happens if I wanted to do a different cycle? So that would be okay too. Everything's the same except the phase shift. So say I go back over here and let's look at a different cycle. So say I pick this cycle here starting down here at the bottom. I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to come up. I'm going to go down, and it would end over here. So the only difference is what was the phase shift. So in this case, I'm 2 spaces off the y-axis to its starting point, and I went left. So I could have said, well, the phase shift is going to be left 60 degrees because I went 2 spaces to the left. So my equation could actually be y is equal to, and in this case I've started at the bottom. So that means there has to be a vertical reflection. So I'm going to put minus 5 cos 2x. I'm going to say plus 60. That changes and this changes in this case. And plus 1. So that would be if I picked that cycle. And you could have actually picked a different cycle altogether from the ones I've chosen. Those are just some suggested ones. So the things that stay the same are the amplitude, the B value, and the K value. What changes is always the phase shift because it depends on what cycle you pick. There are a lot of options. And if you start at the top, no reflection. If I start at the bottom, there is a reflection.